Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really significant event, one that, well, it continues to hold our attention and spark debate. The circumstances surrounding the death of Princess Diana and Dodi al-Fayed in Paris. That was August 31st, 1997.
Right, a date many people remember.
Exactly. And you've given us excerpts from the YouTube documentary Princess Diana, The Night She Died, from the Real Stories channel.
That's the one.
So our aim in this deep dive isn't just to, recount the documentary's points. We want to unpack the information, look closely at the official explanations alongside the many questions that still linger, and ultimately, hopefully provide you, our listener, with a maybe more profound understanding of this complex and tragic event. So where does this documentary take us right out of the gate?
Well, it throws us straight into the immediate aftermath. It details how Diana and Dodi left the Ritz Hotel around midnight.
Okay.
They were with the bodyguard, Trevor Rees-Jones, and the driver, Henri Paul. Then the Mercedes crashed.
And only the bodyguard survived.
That's right. Devastating. And what's really striking is the initial reaction from the French authorities.
What was that?
7 paparazzi were arrested almost immediately for manslaughter. The idea was it was a high-speed chase. That caused it.
Okay, so paparazzi chase leading to manslaughter charges. But as the documentary shows, that story takes a sharp turn, doesn't it? Pretty quickly.
Oh, incredibly quickly. Within 30 hours, the French authorities announced a completely different conclusion.
Which was?
That the driver, Henri Paul, was actually responsible. They said he was under the influence of alcohol and medication.
Wow, 30 hours. That's fast.
It is. And the documentary really emphasizes this. This became the official line after the 1999 French government inquiry.
It does make you wonder about such a rapid shift in the narrative, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And, what the documentary astutely points out is how this swift explanation, it didn't really quell the early doubts. Not at all.
Right.
A key element here, and something for listeners to consider, is the initial absence of a British inquest.
Even though the bodies were returned to the UK.
Exactly. And the documentary highlights how this lack of an immediate inquest really fueled the many conspiracy theories that started bubbling up almost straight away.
Yeah, you can see why.
It even references the Coroner's Act, the legal requirement for such an inquiry under British law.
Right. And it's fascinating that Tatler magazine, not exactly known for being, a radical publication.
Not at all.
They actually spearheaded a campaign for an inquest. Their central question, and it's one you might find yourself asking too, was just why the death of such a prominent figure in what they called mysterious circumstances wouldn't automatically trigger that legally mandated inquest.
It wasn't just a suggestion. It was, like you said, a legal obligation they felt wasn't being met.
Exactly.
And this is where the documentary really starts to dissect the French inquiry itself. It raises some significant worrying questions about its thoroughness, its conclusions. The implication seems to be that the investigating magistrate and the prosecution, maybe they faced pressure to wrap things up quickly, perhaps feeling that the full truth was just unattainable.
And what's so compelling about this documentary is its access, right? It got hold of a huge amount of confidential evidence.
Yeah, 27 volumes apparently from the French inquiry itself. So this isn't just speculation. The doc presents previously unseen information.
So for us, for the listener, this means we're getting a look behind the the official story.
Precisely. And from this material, the documentary brings forward a series of very specific and, frankly, troubling points.
Like what?
Okay. Take, for instance, the claim that the accident scene was, quote, scrubbed clean and opened within 4 hours.
4 hours? That seems incredibly fast.
It does. And as the documentary argues, this rapid action could very well have destroyed critical forensic evidence before it could be properly examined.
Yeah, absolutely. What else?
Another aspect that really stands out is the alleged exclusion of the traffic police investigation from the official report.
Wait, the standard traffic police report wasn't included?
Apparently not in the main official findings. Which, when you think about it, seems fundamental to understanding any car crash.
Right. Absolutely. Why wouldn't that be core?
Good question. And it doesn't stop there. The documentary asks why the first witness on the scene was reportedly ignored, maybe even silenced by the police.
Ignored and silenced.
That's the claim. So, for the listener, this raises immediate concerns about whether all the relevant information was actually being considered by the French authorities.
And then there's the autopsy of Henri Paul. The documentary uses strong language, calling it blatantly inaccurate.
Yeah, that's a serious accusation.
Yeah.
Furthermore, it points to the apparent lack of proper investigation into the um, Secret Service connections of both Henri Paul and another key witness.
Secret Service connections.
Hmm. Makes you wonder if certain avenues of inquiry were perhaps deliberately avoided.
And wasn't there a photograph mentioned, taken right before the crash?
Yes. A photograph of the Mercedes occupants, reportedly taken just moments before impact. The documentary suggests this single image raises a whole host of unanswered questions.
Like what was happening inside the car? Their expressions.
Exactly. What was the atmosphere in those final seconds? We just don't know.
Okay, so turning our attention to the night itself, the documentary pieces together the events leading up to the crash. Diana and Dodi arrive in Paris.
Yeah, from Sardinia.
Hmm.
And they're immediately met by this swarm of paparazzi, including a guy named Fabrice Chaussuri.
Okay.
The doc even hints that his photos might have captured the beginnings of maybe some kind of argument or disagreement.
Interesting. And what about Henri Paul's role? He wasn't the regular driver, was he?
No, he was deputy head of security at the Ritz, seemingly kind of press-ganged into driving at the last minute.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really fascinating and something for listeners to really consider. The documentary claims, and says this is supported by his closest friend, that he'd been a long-standing agent for MI6 since at least 1992, according to the source. Now, if true, that injects a significant layer of, well, political sensitivity into the whole thing, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Wow. Okay. The documentary also touches on Diana's state of mind around that time.
Yeah, it mentions her visit to the Villa Windsor, that feeling she had of being watched under surveillance,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even perhaps a sort of sense of amusement at the intense public reaction to her relationship with Dodi.
Right, like she was aware of the stir she was causing.
Exactly. It paints a picture of someone living under a microscope, but maybe not entirely unhappy with the attention, or at least aware of its impact.
And their dinner plans changed that night too, right?
They did. A reservation at a restaurant was canceled because of the crowds, the paparazzi. So they went back to the Ritz, had dinner there, then went up to the Imperial Suite.
So kind of spontaneous changes.
Seems that way. These little details, they paint a picture of a seemingly unplanned evening, which sort of contrasts sharply with later suggestions of, meticulously planned events or conspiracy.
And Henri Paul himself, he wasn't even supposed to be working late, was he?
No, he'd finished his shift at 7 p.m., but then he was asked to come back just 2 hours later.
Why? That seems like a detail worth looking at.
It does. And Mohammed al-Fayed's recollection is included, too. His phone call with Dodi around midnight.
What did he say?
He reportedly advised Dodi to just stay in the hotel because of the paparazzi danger outside. And Dodi apparently agreed at first.
But then changed his mind.
According to al-Fayed, yes. After speaking with Henri Paul, who assured him he had a plan to evade the photographers using the back entrance.
Ah, the decoy plan, using 2 cars.
Exactly, 2 Mercedes vehicles. Henri Paul took the wheel of the second car, the one that ultimately crashed with Diana, Dodi, and Trevor Rees-Jones inside, leaving from the back.
Okay, but then the route they took, that's presented as really strange, isn't it?
Oh, highly unusual. And perhaps one of the most puzzling aspects for listeners to consider. Instead of going the quickest way to Dodi's apartment, up the Champs-Élysées.
Which would be the logical route.
Absolutely. The car made a left turn at the Place de la Concorde and drove along the riverbanks, along the Seine, actually driving away from their destination.
And the French inquiry didn't investigate that turn.
The documentary emphasizes that this significant deviation from the most logical route was apparently never properly investigated by the inquiry.
Okay, that's odd. So the documentary then shifts to witness accounts.
Right. And it notes that most witnesses didn't actually see the impact itself. They were either at the tunnel's entrance or exit.
But there was one key witness mentioned, Eric Patel.
Yes, Eric Patel, allegedly driving behind the Mercedes. And his testimony was reportedly disregarded by the inquiry, ignored.
Ignored. Why?
Well, we'll get to that. But he wasn't the only one who reported something unusual just before the crash.
Oh, who else?
Someone named Clive Guru Voodoo. He was on the bridge above the tunnel.
Okay.
And he described hearing this very loud noise from the car, like a racing engine, but not in gear.
What did he think that meant?
His interpretation, according to the documentary, was that the driver might have, maybe momentarily, put the car in neutral and just floored the accelerator.
Yeah.
Which is a very specific and potentially significant detail if true.
Yeah, very specific. And Patel, the witness driving behind, what was his experience after the crash?
Well, his experience as presented is particularly concerning. He claims he called emergency services, went to the police station to give his account,
Okay, doing the right thing.
only to find himself handcuffed and taken to police headquarters.
Handcuffed. Why?
The documentary even alleges that the chief of police at the time, a man named Masoni, briefed the press claiming Patel was lying.
Whoa. Discrediting a key witness almost immediately.
That's the picture painted. For the listener, this obviously raises serious questions about how potential eyewitnesses were treated.
Definitely.
The documentary adds that Patel's lawyer apparently had his version of the story within 3 days, suggesting maybe a swift attempt to get his side out there before it was completely dismissed.
And his statement.
Allegedly lost by the police initially, they later tried to portray him as unreliable, maybe difficult to understand.
But did he actually call emergency services?
Well, a call was confirmed. But confusingly, the caller claimed to be speaking from Alma Marceau, which isn't a real place.
Right.
So that just adds another layer of sort of confusion around his account.
Okay. The documentary also brings up concerns about just general procedures, right? Evidence handling.
Yes, very much so. It mentions the head of security for Harrods, who had a Scotland Yard background.
What do you say?
He reportedly expressed surprise at the lack of a backup vehicle for Diana and Dodi, given their profile, and also the failure of the French police to properly secure and isolate the tunnel right after the crash.
Yeah, standard procedure, you'd think.
And those images shown in the documentary of the tunnel being sprayed down with detergent shortly before dawn, they're quite striking.
Sprayed down?
Yeah. As the documentary suggests, that action could easily have destroyed any remaining forensic evidence. You have to wonder, was that standard? Or something else?
Oh, right. And the inquiry itself, the French one, it was conducted under a specific system.
Yes, under what are described as Napoleonic rules of secrecy, conducted by a relatively middle-ranking judge, Hervé Stephan.
And what does that mean, Napoleonic rules?
It essentially limited public access to information and external scrutiny. It's an inquisitorial system where the same state official is basically the investigator and the judge.
So different from the UK or US system.
Very different.
Right.
And, that potentially creates opportunities for bias or maybe undue influence compared to a more open adversarial system.
Okay. And tied into the secrecy, what about that traffic police investigation we mentioned earlier?
Right. The documentary states that the standard accident investigation done by the French traffic police was never made public, never included in the official inquiry report.
Seriously?
That's the claim. There were even suggestions mentioned that the traffic police felt pressure from the Élysée, the French presidential palace, to kind of keep it low-key, downplay their findings.
Pressure from the top. That raises huge questions about the independence of the whole official account.
It certainly does. Which leads us directly into the contradictions within that official explanation itself.
Like the speed of the conclusion. Drunk driving.
Exactly. Announced within just 36 hours. Before, crucially, the full analysis of Henri Paul's body samples was even complete. It just seems incredibly quick to land on such a definitive cause.
Unusually quick.
Indeed. And the documentary highlights allegations of just outright false statements being made early on.
Such as?
Like the claim Henri Paul was drunk as a pig, or that the Mercedes speedometer was frozen at 192 kilometers per hour.
But wasn't that speedometer claim debunked?
Reportedly, yes.
Yeah.
Mercedes themselves apparently stated that their speedometers would automatically go back to zero on a major impact like that.
So these discrepancies, they're hard for anyone trying to understand this to just ignore.
Very hard. And then there's the alleged suppression of photographic evidence, that traffic camera photo.
Ah, yes, the one supposedly showing the car and the occupants looking normal.
That's the one. It supposedly showed the speed, too, despite initial excuses about the camera's flash not working.
But it was working.
Evidence later suggested it was functional. Another driver got a ticket shortly before. And the documentary mentions that the final unpublished speed estimate found within the inquiry files was much lower, around 65 mile per hour, not 120 mile per hour, 192 kilometer up.
So why would that photo and the lower speed estimate be withheld?
Another very good question the documentary raises.
And what about Henri Paul's actual state? Was there evidence contradicting the drunk narrative?
Yes. The documentary presents video footage from the Ritz Hotel lobby just about 30 minutes before the crash.
And what does it show?
It shows Henri Paul seemingly sober. He's seen bending down, tying his shoelaces without any obvious difficulty or impairment.
Okay.
And Trevor Rees-Jones, the bodyguard, the sole survivor, He also reported having no suspicion whatsoever that Henry Paul was intoxicated.
So eyewitness accounts and video evidence contradicting the official story of him being severely drunk.
Directly contradicting it, yes.
Which brings us back to the autopsy. The questions around that seem deeply troubling.
They really are. While a high blood alcohol level was reported 1.74 grams, more than twice the UK limit.
Okay.
The documentary also draws attention to the presence of legal prescription medication and, perhaps more significantly, a strikingly high carbon monoxide reading, 20.7%.
Carbon monoxide, what effect would that have?
Well, for the listener, it's important to understand that such a high level could seriously impair judgment and behavior, make someone act erratically. It's very high.
And al-Fayed tried to get an independent look at this, didn't he?
He did. His repeated requests for an independent postmortem, for independent analysis of the tissue samples, they were denied, with no reason given, apparently.
He couldn't even be present at examinations.
Also denied. This lack of transparency around the crucial evidence from Henry Paul's body is certainly something the documentary flags as suspicious.
And didn't other pathologists look at the report?
Yes, al-Fayed commissioned 4 independent European pathologists. They reviewed the official postmortem report.
And their findings?
They identified a staggering 28 critical errors. Things like no proper timing listed for the autopsy, inadequate description for identifying the body, and, crucially, no explanation at all for those bizarrely high carbon monoxide levels.
28 errors.
That's what they reported. Their conclusion was pretty stark. The CO results were inexplicable, and the possibility of a sample mix-up needed serious investigation.
A mix-up? How?
Well, they point out there were 22 other bodies in the morgue that same night. Mix-ups can happen.
Has al-Fayed pursued testing the samples?
He sued for DNA testing to confirm whose samples they were, but according to the documentary, he hasn't succeeded so far. A judge reportedly even called the blood samples the great mystery of the affair, but didn't investigate it further.
A mystery left unsolved.
Seems so. And the documentary notes that Richard Tomlinson, the former MI6 officer, found it strange that Judge Stiffen didn't thoroughly explore Harry Paul's known security connections either.
Right, the MI6 link again. So many threads left hanging. Are there other missing pieces mentioned?
Yes, quite a few. Like Dodi's missing possessions. He definitely had his mobile phone that night.
Okay.
But police logs reportedly indicated he had no phone on him after the crash. No papers, no lighter, no cigarettes, just 1,000 French francs.
That's weird. Where did his things go?
Unclear. Furthermore, the documentary cites a high-ranking police source who allegedly confirmed 2 things. One, that illegal drugs were found in the car.
Really? That wasn't in the official report?
Not mentioned widely, no. And 2, that the speed camera photo did exist, but again, it was never produced.
So, missing possessions, alleged drugs, a suppressed photo. It paints a very murky picture indeed.
It does. And there's another photo mentioned too, taken maybe 20 minutes past midnight. It appears to show the Mercedes from the front.
From the front? How?
Good question. Trevor Rees-Jones is apparently seen looking in the rearview mirror. It raises the obvious questions. Who took that photograph and from where? Suggests someone else was there observing them.
Okay, and then there's the whole white Fiat Uno angle. That's always been part of the story.
Right. The police claim that debris found in the tunnel bits of taillight, white paint traces on the Mercedes wing mirror, indicated a white Fiat Uno was involved, probably in front of the Mercedes.
Did they find it?
Well, the police conducted a massive search for white Fiat Uno owners in Paris, but officially they found nothing relevant.
But al-Fayed's investigators did.
According to the documentary, yes. They tracked down a white Fiat Uno, one that had recently had its rear taillights fixed, belonging to a paparazzi photographer named James Andanson.
James Andanson. Another paparazzi connection. What was his story?
His background, as presented, is particularly intriguing. He wasn't just any paparazzi. He had significant political connections, official photographer to one French PM, friendly with another.
So well-connected.
Very. He'd even been investigated by the French Special Branch before, due to his history. And the doc mentions rumors that MI6 sometimes used freelance photographers.
Okay.
Adding to the intrigue, the widow of one of Andanson's friends apparently claimed he had boasted to her about being present in the tunnel that night.
He boasted about being there.
That's the claim cited. And the French Special Branch reportedly became very interested in him again when they noted she was the last person to photograph and one of the last to speak with former Prime Minister Pierre Bérégovoy before his death under suspicious circumstances.
Wow. That's a lot. What happened to Andanson?
He died in June 2000, apparently committed suicide by setting himself on fire in his car deep in the French countryside. left no note.
Suicide? Was that accepted?
Both his friends and even the funeral director expressed skepticism about the suicide ruling, according to the documentary. And none of this connection, none of Andonson's story, was ever mentioned by the French inquiry.
Another major loose end, seemingly ignored.
Exactly. Which brings us finally to the British inquest, the one that was legally required.
Right, because Diana and Dodi were British subjects dying abroad in mysterious circumstances. But it was delayed for years.
Massively delayed. Deaths in 1997, no inquest opened until 2004, 7 years later.
Why the delay?
The official reasons given, like waiting for the French inquiry to conclude, were dismissed in the documentary as rather feeble excuses.
So it finally opened in 2004. Who ran it?
The royal coroner formally opened it and then asked Lord Stevens, the former commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, to essentially investigate the French investigation, Operation Paget.
Okay, Lord Stevens. A serious figure.
Very. And he gained access to documents others hadn't seen. His report and conclusion, that there really was something wrong with the way the French had gone about the investigation. He cited new witnesses, new forensic evidence.
So it sounded like things might finally get properly looked at.
You'd think so. But then, in a truly shocking turn, in June 2006, the coroner running the inquest suddenly announced they were simply too time-consuming and resigned.
Resigned, leaving the inquests in limbo.
Exactly. A legally required inquest was open, but suddenly was no one to run it. At that point, the documentary notes, the prediction was it might not even properly begin until 2008, 11 years after the crash.
11 years. Incredible. So, as we bring this deep dive into the documentary's findings to a close, you can really see the sheer volume of unresolved questions, haven't you? The inconsistency.
Absolutely. The stark contrast between that initial, simple, official narrative drunk driver tragic accident and the mountain of doubts cast upon the evidence, the witnesses, the procedures, it's quite profound.
This exploration, based on the source you provided, it reveals a far more intricate and frankly troubling picture than those first reports ever conveyed.
Yeah, it's a picture marked by so many unexplained details, these allegations of suppressed evidence, and just a series of deeply disturbing anomalies that, well, they continue to fuel speculation even today.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Consider, just for a moment, the implications of having so many unanswered questions surrounding such a significant high-profile event. What does it mean for public trust when things are left so ambiguous, with so much conflicting information swirling around? And what paths of further inquiry might you, our listener, feel compelled to explore based on what we've discussed from this documentary today? It certainly leaves you with a lot to ponder.